Welcome to PA 910 Organizational Behavior and Leadership. This is a review of AMA style. It is important that you watch this video to its entirety, and I would also print out the associated PowerPoint presentation and keep it handy when you are doing your writing for this class. You will be graded on your AMA style. I like to tell people to think of this as an extension of your introductory class in the doctoral project series. So it's like an extension of PA 960. For those of you who may be only taking a certificate and are not familiar with AMA style, this is an introduction for you as well. And then also for our master's degree level students coming out of the University of Lynchburg's PA program, this is also helpful to you since you do not have PA 960. So the purpose of this video is to review common errors in AMA style. I do want to point out that our program utilizes the 11th edition. This 11th edition is free through the University of Lynchburg Library. I would highly encourage you to use the AMA style guide that is available through the library, and do not Google rules about AMA style, because many times it's rules from the 10th edition. We will talk about referencing in this video. We're going to go over a little bit about capitalization, acronyms. We're going to talk about levels of headings, and we're going to also talk about referring to authors within the text. We'll review the proper steps in proofreading process, and then finally we're going to wrap up with avoiding plagiarism, direct quotes versus paraphrasing. So first, let's talk about how to reference a book. One of the biggest errors that I see in writing is that when you reference a book, people are including the city and the state of the publisher. This is no longer needed in the reference per the 11th edition of the AMA Style Guide. In the 10th edition, it was required, but it has since been dropped with the 11th edition. And so on this slide, I have given you the correct way to reference our textbook. So when you do your discussion board post and when you write your paper for this term, you should use this correct reference for our textbook. And as you will see, the incorrect reference includes the city and state of the publisher, Burlington, Massachusetts. So that is no longer needed. And I also want to note that the name of the book is italicized. You may want to reference a specific page or a set of pages within a book. When you do that, you would use the same base for the book itself. Like, again, here's an example of our textbook. And after the year, you would put colons, and then directly after the colons, you would put the page numbers, 69 through 72. You do not use a semicolon, you use a colon, and the numbers immediately follow the colon. There is no space. Keep in mind, with AMA, you're always trying to conserve type. So anytime you kind of keep that rule in the back of your head, it will help guide you in the correct way that AMA, it'll help guide you in the way AMA kind of thinks. Sometimes you might want to reference a specific page in a book. If you used a specific range of pages in a book, then the numbers are noted at the end of the reference. You would put a colon, not a semicolon, and then you directly follow that colon with the page range that you utilized. So in this example, we utilized pages 69 through 72. When you reference journal articles, there are some rules that you need to follow. And when referencing a journal article that has more than 6 authors, you only list the first 3 authors and you follow the third author's name with et al. Also, the first word of journal article titles are capitalized, as are proper nouns. Everything else is written in small letters. Journal names should also be abbreviated and italicized. If you don't know the abbreviation of your journal, you can look at the National Centers for Biotechnical Information, NCBI, the NLM catalog database, and you can see the website there, and it will tell you the correct way to abbreviate your journal. You should never include ISBN numbers or PMCID numbers. Here is an example of a journal article that has less than 6 authors on the left-hand side and more than 6 authors on the right-hand side. So you will see the author's name. The author's name is, the last name is written first. There are no commas between the author's last name and the author's initials. And then you follow the author's initials with a period. With the title, you capitalize the first word and any proper nouns within the title. So United is capitalized because it's the first word, and it's also part of a proper noun of the United States. So since States is a proper noun, you would capitalize the S. Everything else is not capitalized. As you will see here, then you have the abbreviated journal, and it is also italicized. And then you have a period, the year, semicolon, the volume in the issue, and then a colon, and then the page range. You do include the DOI. I want to also point out that there is no period after the DOI. If you put a period after the DOI, you will not be able to access it when you cut and paste that into a browser if the period is on there. On the right-hand side, if you have 6 authors or more than 6 authors, so 7, 8, 9, 10, you only list the first 3 authors' names, and you follow the third author's initials with a comma and then add et al. Once again, I want to point out that only the first word of the title is capitalized. Every other word is written in small letters. The journal's name is abbreviated and it's italicized. And then you can see there the year, the volume, the issue, and the DOI. So here are a couple of examples. The top example is incorrect because there is a comma after the author's name and there are periods after the initials. This is more in the lines of what you would see in an APA reference. Again, keep in mind that the goal of AMA is to keep down the amount of type. So we do not want commas after the author's names, and we do not want periods after the author's initials. And again, as you will see on the corrected, there is no period after the DOI. In the incorrect, there is a period after the DOI. Here's another example of referencing journal articles. So in this particular reference, you will see that the author capitalized every single word of the journal title. And this is incorrect. You only capitalize the first word and any proper nouns. So the disease, Alzheimer's disease, is named after a physician, so that is considered a proper noun, so it would be capitalized. In the corrected area, you will see that imaging, blood, biomarker, all of those words are written with small letters, with the exception of Alzheimer's because it is a proper noun. And in the end, there is no period after the DOI. The journal name is abbreviated and italicized. Here's another example of a journal article. And what is incorrect in this one is you will see that the author spelled out in the long version of the journal title. Again, you should look at the NCBI database to find out how to shorten journal titles. And in addition, the journal title is not italicized. The correct way to write this reference is below with the abbreviated JAMA neural period, and it is italicized. And each major word is capitalized. And finally, review every reference, even if it is generated by a citation generation such as Zotero or RefWorks. Make sure your generator is set to AMA style. APA style is dramatically different than AMA. And I can always tell immediately if somebody has written in APA style because the author's names have the comma after it, and then the periods after the initials, and then there's usually, in an APA style, the dead giveaway is that there is a date directly after all of the author's names. So please make sure you are looking at the references that are generated. Those reference generators will only get you about 80% of the way there. They generally do not come out 100% correct. So even if you're using Zotero, RefWorks, or maybe something you found online to generate your references, please continue to look at them and make sure that they are written correctly and make sure that you are using AMA style. The AMA style manual recommends citing electronic video content such as a TED Talk as an online conference presentation. In this class, you will reference TED Talks quite frequently. The citation would adhere to the following structure. You would write the author's name and then put a period, and then the title of the presentation and then a period, and where it was presented, the date of the presentation, the location of the presentation, the URL, and the date that the URL was accessed. So here's an example. This is one of the TED Talks that you will watch as part of this class. The incorrect way to do this is to write the author's name and not include the author's name in the title. In TED Talks, the author's name goes first. So the author is Regina Hartley. But the actual titles of the presentations are cataloged by the author's first and last name. So when you catalog a TED Talk, it goes Regina Hartley and then colon and then whatever the presentation is. So if this was an electronic talk and I posted this, which I will, it would say read in period and then Nancy Reed colon review of AMA style period. So the actual title includes the author's first and last name. Now, sometimes you can't see the information in the TED Talk superscript down at the bottom of the TED Talks, but if you watch the video, you will actually see where the TED Talk was given. So on this particular TED Talk with Regina Hartley, it says that the TED Talk was given at TED at UPS, and it tells the date on the actual TED Talk recording. So make sure you're looking for all the components because they may not be easily found like in a subscript underneath the TED Talk. It may actually be embedded in the talk itself. Note, if you are using a video found on the TED website, additional information about the specific conference in the presentation may be given and is available. The example actually has this example actually has all that information listed in it. So now we're going to talk about levels of headings. Headings are meant to divide a primary part into secondary parts and so on. And there should be usually a minimum of 2. So if you decide to use a level 1 heading, you have to use at least 2 level 1 headings. If you decide to break a level 1 heading down and put level 2 headings, you also have to have at least 2 level 2 headings. This helps reflect the progression of logic or the flow of thought in an article and thereby guide the reader. So the way you do level headings, AMA style does not specifically detail how you write level headings. So I'm going to give you some guidance in this video. Level 1 headings should be in all caps, they should be bolded, and they should be left justified, as you see in the example here. Level 2 headings should have just the first letter capitalized of each major word. They should be left justified. And level 3 headings, you actually tab over one tab. Only the first word is capitalized. And you put a period after the level 3 heading and then start whatever your paragraph is. In your paper, you will use level headings. The template is already set up for you using this level heading setup. So you don't have to really think too much. Just make sure you're using the template that is provided for you for the paper. Sometimes you may want to refer to an author within the writing of your text. So when you mention an author's name in the text, there are some rules that cover that. So if it's the one author, you would just put their last name. You never put their first name or their first and middle initials unless they both have the same name. So let's say a husband and wife wrote a paper, then you could put an initial, but generally you just use the last name. So in the first example, Doe reported on the survey. So it's one author, you put the last name. If there are two authors, you write both their last names and you join it by and. If there are three authors, you only use the first author's last name and then you follow it by either et al. You could also follow it by and associates or and colleagues. So anything 3 authors and above in the text, this is different than on the reference page. You just put the first author's last name and follow it by et al. Or and associates or and colleagues. Do not use the possessive forms of et al. And there is not a period after all when you use it in the sentence. So let's talk a little bit about proofreading. Proofreading is very important. It is important to even proofread your discussion boards. And one of the things when you're proofreading, I want you to pay close attention to is review of capitalization. For whatever reason, PA students really like to capitalize. We overcapitalize in our writing quite frequently. So one thing I want to talk about is titles of medical articles. When you're talking about a title of a medical article within the text, you would capitalize all the major words within the text. But if you talk about a title of a medical article in a reference, you do not capitalize all of the letters. You only capitalize the first word and then any proper nouns that appear in the title. So this is what it would look like. The top is if the top is an example if you mention it within the text, and the bottom is what it would look like if you mentioned it on a reference page. So we capitalize names of languages, nationalities, racial categories, ethnicities, political parties, religions, and religious denominations. Do not capitalize political doctrine or general forms of government, and capitalize black and white as designations of race. Avoid using in the noun form. So on the right-hand side are some examples of how we would capitalize these. And you'll look at the example where it says black individuals and white patients would be the proper usage of capitalization of those. We also capitalize events, awards, and legislations. Capitalize the names of historical and special events, historical periods, and awards, but not common nouns that follow the names. So example, Nobel Prize winner, you would capitalize Nobel Prize, but you would not capitalize winter. If you use Nobel Prize in and of itself, you would capitalize that within a writing. Here's another one that people struggle with in medical writing is proprietary names. So we capitalize trademarks, proprietary names of drugs, and brand names of manufactured products and equipment. Do not capitalize generic names or descriptive terms. And do not include trademark or copyright symbols after proprietary or brand names. So here's an example. Each study patient was given 20 milligrams of diphenhydramine, Benadryl, as a sleep aid. Now, in this example, this is straight out of the AMA guide. It added McNeil Consumer Healthcare. It really depends on your journal if you would add that in. But again, the take-home point is the generic name diphenhydramine is not capitalized, but Benadryl or the trade name is. So test. The exact and complete titles of test and subscales of test should be capitalized. The word itself, test, is not usually capitalized except when it is part of an official name of a test. So as you will see here, like Faber test, Fisher's exact test, those would not be capitalized. The word test would not be, but if test is actually part of the proper name, then you would add it. Titles and degrees of persons. Capitalize a person's title when it precedes the person's name, but not when it follows the name. So for instance, program chair Allison Hemmings, as you will see, it precedes the person's name, so you would capitalize it. In the second example, it is after her name, so you would not capitalize it. And again, Dr. Colvin is the principal investigator. Principal investigator follows the person's name, so you would not capitalize it. If it precedes it, you do capitalize it. Capitalize academic degrees when abbreviated, but not when written out. So Sharita Evanson, MA. Sharita Evanson received her master's degree from Vanderbilt University. So you see, master's degree is not capitalized. So I'm gonna hit one that's near and dear to my heart. Titles and degrees of persons. Names of occupations are not capitalized. So physician assistant is an occupation. It is not capitalized. Nurse practitioner is not capitalized. Doctor is not capitalized. Names of departments within a hospital are not capitalized. So I get people frequently capitalizing physician assistant works in the emergency room or works in the critical care unit. Departments are not capitalized. And just avoid over-capitalizing medical words. Ask yourself, is it a proper noun? If it's not a proper noun, do not capitalize it. So when you are going through the proofreading process, what I want you to do is I want you to go through all of your writing and everything that's capitalized, stop and ask yourself, should this really be capitalized? So that should be one step in your proofreading process. Now we're going to talk a little bit about acronyms. Acronyms the acronyms have to be defined the first time it is used in the text, and then after that, the acronym can be used every time after. So here's an example. The World Health Organization, and then you'll see in parentheses, WHO, works on various aid organizations throughout the world. Now, if you want to talk about WHO again, then you can use the abbreviation once it has been clearly defined. Do not capitalize the words from which an acronym is taking the place of. So, for instance, on PSA, you would not capitalize prostate or specific or antigen. You would capitalize the acronym, but you would not capitalize what it's taking the place of unless it is a proper noun like World Health Organization. And so there's two examples of when it is a proper noun. So you first have to define it before you can use the acronym. That's the big take home off of this slide. And acronyms and initialisms. When there has been a stretch to create a study name or the name of a writing group that makes sense, and it's easy to say and somehow relates to the name of the group, but the first letter of every major word do not actually match the acronym. Do not use unusual capitalizations to indicate how the study name has been derived. So if every single word is not represented, so for example, you have a whole bunch of I's and Roman numerals in here, you wouldn't then highlight or bold or capitalize something that is not supposed to be capitalized, just so it's clear how the acronym was made. So for instance, I think the fourth example is a pretty good example. There's I guess it's a study or an event called CURE. And you can see angina is in there and prevent is in there, but you wouldn't go and capitalize or bold or make like maybe a different color, the CU, the R, and the E, so people can so it jumps out how they got CURE. You just write it out and then write the acronym at the end. So one of the final things for proofreading, make sure that Grammarly is installed on your computer. It will save you lots and lots of trouble with proofreading. It catches a lot of the errors. It doesn't catch all of them. And in order to help try and catch all of them, the first thing I would ask you to do is read your writing out loud. Even the discussion board posts need to be read out loud. After you've read it out loud, have someone read your writing out loud to you. And if it doesn't sound correct, then it probably isn't sound correct to the person who's reading it either. Look for overcapitalization, look for run-on sentences, and look for acronym usages. Let's talk about run-on sentences for a second. I have what's called the Dr. Reed rule of 2 lines. So this isn't anything you're going to find in an official textbook, but I'd like to tell my students that if you have a sentence that has went over 2 lines, look at it closely and ask yourself, can this be broken up into 2 sentences so it reads more clearly? Now, I will tell you that sometimes sentences go on to 3 or 4 lines, especially when you're listing certain things. But sometimes, even if it's grammatically correct, sentences can be broken up into 2 or 3 separate sentences, and it's just easier and clearer to read, and it's easier to comprehend. So if your sentences are exceeding about 2 lines, look at them closely and ask yourself, would this sentence be better served as 2 or 3 separate sentences? So finally, review your references, especially those, again, that were created by citation generators and those that come from foreign journals. Foreign journal references are notorious for not being created correctly in citation generators. Look at your writing. Make sure that the superscript immediately follows the punctuation. The superscript should not be in front of the period. It should be after the period, and it should immediately follow the period. Again, you want to keep down the amount of type that you have in your paper. So it's the punctuation, and then you immediately follow it with the superscript. References should be numbered consecutively with Arabic numbers in the order in which they are cited in the text. So the first reference gets a number 1. The second reference gets a number 2. And then you list the references on the reference page as they appear in the text. So that's how it is. That's the rules for AMA. So let's talk real quick about avoiding plagiarism, direct quotes versus paraphrasing. So direct quotes is something that's taken word for word from the original text. And sometimes it's important to do a direct quote. Maybe you really want the clarity of whatever the person said not to be lost. So you'll use a direct quote. When you use a direct quote, you use double quotation marks around the original phrase. You then will use a superscript after the quotation mark, and you have to still reference it even though you have it quoted. If it is over 4 lines, you have to use what's called a block quote instead. So if your quote goes over 4 lines on your paper, it has to be broken down into a block quote. So here's what a block quote looks like. You indent on the left and the right side by 0.5. You reduce the type. So for instance, if you're writing in Times New Roman 12, you would reduce this down to Times New Roman 10. You write whatever you're quoting, but you do not use the quotation marks. The block quote takes the place of the quotation marks. Paragraph indents are generally not used unless the quoted material is known to begin a paragraph. So if it actually is the beginning of a paragraph, you would indent. Otherwise, you would not. Space is often added above and below these longer quotations to kind of set it off from the rest of the type. If the block quotation appears in a section to be set in reduced type, do not reduce the type size of the quoted material further. If another quotation appears within the block quote, use the double quotation marks around the contained quotation. So if there is a quote within this block, then you would use double quotations in this block. So in general, I like to tell students that with AMA style, paraphrasing is the preferred method. If you do not absolutely have to do a direct quote, your goal should be to paraphrase. And how you paraphrase is you put a passage or an idea from another person's work in your own words. It's generally shorter and more condensed than the original. And paraphrasing are annotated with superscript only. There are no quotation marks. So you will see in this first example, we paraphrased what was written in reference 2, 4, and 7. And you put your period and you follow the numbers directly after the period, and you put commas in between if there are multiple references that say the same thing. So here's a couple of miscellaneous writing references for you. The top is just a capitalization reference guide for those of you who maybe have been out of the writing world for a little bit. It kind of goes over capitalization rules for you. And then finally, I love this one. I make all my students who are thinking about going and becoming a physician assistant, I make them look at this as part of their training before they start writing letters of intent for schools, so they make sure that they spell it correctly. There are very few times that physician assistant or nurse practitioner should be capitalized, so kind of keep that in the back of your head. And that concludes this presentation. I hope that you found this helpful. Please make sure you do watch this before you start trying to write discussion board posts or write your paper for your PA 910 class.